crossover segment is one which moves at a lightning pace, with new models arriving all of the time. Now, the Kia XCeed, which we're looking at today, has actually been around for a little while now, but Kia has ensured that it maintains its trajectory upwards with a recent refresh bringing a new design and some clever in-car tech. But with so many different options, why should you be looking at the XCeed? Well, today we're going to find out what it's like to drive, what it's like inside, and most importantly, why you should choose it. So stick around to find out. Kia has done some nice little changes to the look of the XCeed to make sure that it's in fighting chance of keeping up with its rivals. So the Tiger Nose grille has been remodelled, while the lights, both front and rear, are sharper than before. It's a little bit higher than the usual Ceed hatchback, and it's a little bit shorter than the Sportage, but it still has some nice chunky dimensions. You might notice that front and back, it's also got Kia's brand new logo. There's a very impressive level of fit and finish inside the XCeed. Now, the material quality is by and large pretty good. There's some shiny black plastic here, which I'm never a fan of just because it attracts dust and fingerprints. But this nice rubberized effect material and the silver coloured elements help to make it all feel a little bit more premium than you might expect. You've also got plenty of equipment. Now, this is a GT line model, which means that it gets all the bells and whistles, but I've got heated seats and a heated steering wheel, wireless smartphone charging, and I've also got 3 separate sockets for charging up devices, so onboard equipment is good. And then the fundamentals are also pretty pleasant too. There's a large screen in the middle, but you've got these nice shortcut buttons here which make it easier to use on the move, and most importantly, I've got a nice dial for the volume, which again is much more intuitive to use when you're actually driving. Nice buttons for the heating and ventilation controls in the middle, and this model also has a virtual dial set up ahead of you, which is clear and easy to read. But I think what shines through most of all is just how well built everything feels, and definitely something that you might not consider from this size and type of vehicle. It's a bit of a mixed bag inside the back of the XCeed. Leg and knee rim levels are pretty good, and there's plenty of space for my feet too, and there's some nice little concave areas for some added space for my knees, and then below that there's a good little netting for putting those looser items. Headroom isn't too bad, but I think taller passengers are going to feel a little bit squeezed in here. And also, because of these thick pillars, the rear seats of the XCeed just feel a little bit claustrophobic. It feels just very dark. However, having said that, there's not too much of a transmission tunnel in the middle, so you're going to be able to get a person in here, though it is going to be a little bit of a squeeze shoulder width wise. And in the middle there is a single USB-C charger for putting power into your devices. In terms of ISOFIX points, we've got ones either side, so in the outermost seats, and fold down the armrest and you'll find 2 compact cup holders as well. Coming in at 426 litres, the boot that you get in the Kia XCeed is pretty decent, although it's slightly less than the 455 litres you'll get from Volkswagen's T-Roc. Once you're inside, it's nice and square, though there are some cutouts coming through from the wheels, and you've got some nice neat lashing points down the bottom for putting some lashing points down and keeping those looser items safe. Lifting up underneath, well, there's no wheel down there, and to be honest, you wouldn't really want to use that as storage because it's all going to rock around a bit too much. But you can lower the seats down and you extend that boot area a little bit more. One thing I will say is that this whole aperture is quite small, so it feels like those wider items are going to be a little bit more difficult to get in there. Here in the XCeed, we've got a 1.5 litre turbocharged petrol engine with 156 brake horsepower. Now, the model that we're in today has got a 6-speed manual gearbox, and that means that you should get a 0 to 60 mile an hour time of around about 8.7 seconds, which isn't all that quick, but it's more than enough for the type of driving that you'd usually do in a car like this. Because it's turbocharged, not naturally aspirated, I've got a decent amount of flexibility too, and in fact this car picks up speed in a nice enough action that doesn't feel bogged down or just too slow for the road really. Now, in GT line cars with their larger wheels, you do get a slightly lower consumption figure, and that's about 44.8 mpg in this car. If you go for the entry-level XCeed on its smaller wheels, then expect to see slightly better efficiency returns. There's not much wind noise being generated by the windscreen in the front of the car though, so that's a good impression that you get from that aspect. The action of the clutch and the pedals is all really nice and light, and that means that it doesn't feel too intrusive to actually just change gears nice and easily. They're all nicely spaced, and the action of the gearbox itself is really light. You can get the XCeed with an automatic gearbox as well, and obviously that's going to be a better choice for if you're doing longer journeys or plenty of time spent on the motorway. But actually the 6 speeds action is really pleasant. Actually, once you're in 6th, the engine settled down really nicely. CO2 emissions stand at 143 grams per kilometre, and I'd say that's about right for the market, though I would like to see it slightly lower, a little bit nearer to that magic figure of 100 grams per kilometre. But given this car is a little bit more upright and it's on quite large wheels in this one, I'd say that's probably about what you'd expect for this size and shape of car. One thing I will say about the XCeed is it actually managed to control its body weight quite well. It's not overly stiff, so I'm not getting upset by the lumps and bumps in the road, but when you're coming through these corners, there's not too much lean, and that means you're not going to feel out of place when you're going on quicker bends, or even just going through those long sweeping bends that you often find on the motorway. One thing I will say is that the power seems to arrive much more keenly higher up the rev range. When you're going away from a dead stop, this car can feel a little bit bogged down in the lower gears, and it just needs to gain a bit of momentum and a bit of pace to actually implement the power properly. That's just a usual factor of a relatively small capacity engine with a turbocharger. And also the biting point of the clutch is relatively high, so if you're perhaps new to driving or you're still learning, then that's going to be a little bit more difficult, because having that clutch point higher up just makes it a little bit less forgiving than in ones with a wider bite point section. The steering is nice and easy to get along with too. I can't really feel much of what the front wheels are doing, but at least I've got some accurate direction being brought through from the steering wheel. I've got lane keep assist on this model, and actually it's a little bit intrusive for me. I find it's trying to steer me back into the lane, and when you're on country roads, it's just a bit of a pain. Luckily you can quickly switch it off via a long hold on the button on the steering wheel, but it's going to reset each time you restart the car. That's a safety function that's being implemented in most new cars in order to achieve the best possible safety scores, and it's a factor that we're just going to have to get used to in new cars. You can, of course, disable it, like I mentioned, but it just feels like when you're on narrow roads, it sometimes just tries to drag you a little bit too heavily away from the line that you want to choose. One thing I will say is that you can just sometimes feel the front wheels just struggling to put down the power that's being sent through them. When you come through a corner, particularly if the inside wheel is just a little bit lighter and you try and get on the throttle again, you can just feel a slight sensation that the front wheels aren't quite happy with all the power that's being sent through them. It's not a big factor, and let's be honest, this isn't a car to be setting lap times in, but it's just something that comes through when you're driving it, particularly on curvy roads like we're on right now. I would just like a tiny bit more refinement and a little bit more isolation of those road noises, as it just seems quite boomy in here from my first impressions, and it's just, yeah, on those longer journeys it's going to make it a bit louder, a little less comfortable than in other cars. I find the Kia XCeed something of a curious proposition in truth. On the one hand, at just over £22,000 starting, it offers great value and it's got loads of onboard equipment too. And actually, I think it looks pretty cool as well. But on the other, I think it lacks something in the dynamics department, and certainly in that area of refinement. I feel like it's just a little bit too noisy inside, and that puts it below some of its rivals. However, if you do want a quirky crossover that still delivers plenty of in-car equipment and a decent slug of practicality while you're at it, then the XCeed is definitely worth considering. Thank you for watching this new car review on the Kia XCeed. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, please leave us a like below and let us know in the comment section what you think of this car. And since you're here, please remember to subscribe to the Motors.co.uk YouTube channel and click on that bell icon so you never miss a new review.